Hey guys, welcome to this week's lecture. This week's lecture is about fear, and more precisely about the psychology of fear. So we're going to learn a little bit about the science behind fear, how it produces in our brain, what chemicals are involved, and if everybody experiences fear the same, and different types of phobias as well. So before we go ahead and define what fear is, let's take a look at the word psychology. So psychology is a science that studies human behavior and mind. What makes us human? What influences our behaviors? What makes us do certain actions? And just kind of the whole human aspect of everything as well. What is it that makes us human? What differs from animals? Okay, now that we've briefly defined what psychology is, which is a science of human and human behavior, let's take a look at the word fear. I'm sure all of you have felt fear before, more than once in your life, so let's give it a simple definition. Fear is an unpleasant emotion due to the threat of harm, pain, or danger. So we are afraid of things because we perceive it to be dangerous or harmful to us. Not just physically, but also emotionally, which is kind of what differs us between animals. Because animals usually perceive fear as being something physically dangerous for them, whereas us humans, we can consider the emotional side and impact as well. So fear is not just one kind of emotion, it's many emotions that encompass it. You can also experience fear on different levels. You can be a little bit scared of something, or you can go all the way up to having a phobia towards something. So fear can be intense, but can also be slightly smaller. All right, so for the next couple of slides, we'll talk about where fear takes place in the brain, because as you know, the brain is the powerhouse of the body. We experience life through this in our heads. So brain is where everything happens, and of course, fear is where it is as well. So we'll take a look at where exactly fear happens in the brain. I'll talk to you about the different structures of the brain, and then also kind of the different processes that fear goes through for us to experience. All right, so on the screen we have a drawing of a brain, and this view is what we call the cross-section view. A cross-section view just means if we take a brain and cut straight down through the middle, this is what we would see. That we use cross-section views in science and psychology just to have a better look at the different structures of the brain. So the structure we're looking at right now, which is the highlighted yellow part, we call that the limbic system. And part of the limbic system is the amygdala. So before we talk about the amygdala, let's just talk about the limbic system. So really briefly, the limbic system is responsible for our emotions, whether that be fear, happiness, sadness, angriness, whichever one you want to call it, just emotions in general. It's also in charge of survival, instincts, and memory. So survival is very key here because it does link closely with fear. All right, so moving on to the amygdala. The amygdala is a small almond-shaped ball at the bottom of your brain. It's located in the temporal lobe of the brain. Temporal, in scientific terms, just means the side of your brain. Okay, so each person has two amygdala, usually, hopefully, and each amygdala is in the right side of the brain and in the left side of the brain. Okay, so the amygdala is responsible for the perception of emotions such as anger, fear, and sadness, as well as controlling aggression. Okay, so focusing on memories, the amygdala actually helps store memories of events and emotions so that we could recognize it in the future. This is very important with fear, and I'll tell you how it is. So let's use an example. All right, so imagine that you're a 5-year-old just in the park having a good time, and then you see a dog approach you. However, this dog is not a fluffy, friendly dog who just wants to play fetch. This dog looks very angry. Okay, but as a 5-year-old, you've never encountered an angry dog before, and you're thinking, oh, does it want to play? Who knows? So this dog is very angry, it's starting to bark, and it's running at you very fast. You're 5 and you've never experienced this situation before. So your body is starting to think, is this dangerous? I don't know. But it's not quick enough, and the dog bites you on the hand. Okay, and once it's bitten you, you feel this rush of emotions. You feel scared, of course, you feel hurt, and you feel like you're in a lot of danger. So fast forward maybe 10 years from now, you're 15 years old and you're in the park again, doing who knows what, when another dog has arrived and it's showing the same signs as the dog from when you were 5 years old. This dog looks angry and it looks like it's about to run at you. Okay, so this is when your amygdala kicks in. Your amygdala thinks, wait, we've been in this situation before. You know, that dog is very familiar to that dog we encountered when you were 5. So it's going to send signals to your brain saying, hey, listen, I think we should be, a little bit cautious. And it's going to send signals of fear and distress. And that will make your body think, okay, we should move away. And that way, you move away and you won't get hurt. So in a way, the amygdala is most functional in immediate fear situations. That means when you're just having a good old time, who knows where, and all of a sudden your surroundings change, like that dog that comes into the picture, or whatever it is, when your body senses a change, your amygdala automatically prepares your body to escape or for defense. And that's what the amygdala is used for in fear. It's also where it's created. Alright, so now that we've talked about the amygdala, let's move on to the other word on the screen, which is the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus, which sounds a lot like hippopotamus, but it means completely different things, the hypothalamus is another part of the brain that helps process fear. So what happens is your body takes in the signals of fear. For example, you're in a situation, your eyes see it, you smell it, you can feel it, whatever it is, whatever outer signals that you get, your amygdala processes this, and then it starts to send signals to your brain, and you start thinking, oh, I'm in a situation that I can be afraid of, that I'm scared of. Your hypothalamus gets activated at this time and releases hormones. These stress hormones will kick in and tell your amygdala and your body whether you should fight this fear or run away from it. So this fight or run away is what we call fight or flight response. It is an evolutionary response that we have developed over time as humans, and the hypothalamus is in charge of kind of starting that. Alright, so once again, just to go over how your brain functions, how your brain deals with fear in a more kind of simple format so it's more easy to follow. Let's go over it one more time. The amygdala is that little almond-shaped structure in the limbic system. And remember that it's responsible for the production of survival instincts, memory, and emotions, specifically the emotion of fear, because that's what we are talking about. And remember, the amygdala helps you remember stressful situations by storing memory. On the other side, we have the hypothalamus, and it produces chemical messengers called hormones. Everybody has hormones. They're just chemical particles in your body that help your body function. So it controls your stress response, which you undergo when you're experiencing fear, and physiological symptoms. Physiological just means the physical things you actually feel, so what your body actually expresses and shows, includes increased heart rate and rapid breathing. Rapid just means very, very fast breathing. Dilation of pupils, meaning your pupils, the little black circle in your eye gets really, really big. You start sweating, your hands start getting sweaty, I don't know what else, and you also start trembling or shaking. So that is how your body responds to fear, through the amygdala sending the signal to the hypothalamus, which releases hormones that controls your stress response towards that particular fear that you are experiencing. Okay, just to give a little break from the scientific gibberish that I have just thrown at you, on the screen you will see that says fear is created unconsciously. That means we don't choose our fears. We don't just wake up one day, get out of bed, and look at a dog and say, yes, I'm going to be afraid of this dog because this dog looks like it could be scary. Okay. No, we don't do that. Our experiences in life and how we perceive these experiences in our brain is what creates fear. We cannot actually choose what we want to be afraid of, unfortunately. All right, so in the previous slides, I talked about the amygdala and the hypothalamus, which is some of the structures of the brain that helps process fear or to do with fear. There are many other structures of the brain, but those are two of the main ones. So those are the areas where, fear is produced and where our responses are produced, but there is an actual process for fear from where it gets from the amygdala to the hypothalamus, from the hypothalamus to what you show and what you experience. So fear is processed in two different pathways, so two different ways. We call them the high road and the low road. So when you come across something that is scary or that initiates fear in your body, they actually happen at the same time. So your fear goes in two different ways. It goes to the low road and the high road. So the low road is what happens immediately without conscious thought. So that, for example, is let's say you're afraid of spiders and one day you open your, I don't know, a bag of chips and a spider comes out. I don't know why a spider is there, but it's there, and it falls out and it lands on your hand and you start screaming because you are afraid of spiders and you've just opened a bag of potato chips expecting potato chips and not spiders. So you've opened this bag, a spider has fallen out, and now you're screaming and crying hysterically. That immediate reaction is the low road that fear takes because it's instant. It's an instant, oh, I'm scared, let's cry. The high road, though, is when fear takes longer to process, but you kind of have a more precise interpretation of events. Another example, you're walking in the woods and you hear a lot of strange noises. Imagine that the woods, you're at night and it's dark and there's a lot of wind and you think somebody's following you, but in reality, you stop and think, oh, nobody's following me. It's just the sound of the wind making the leaves rustle. So that's the high road. So the low road is kind of like an instinctive, immediate reaction to fear, and the high road is when your body stops. Well, not stops, but the processes take longer, but at the end of the day, you can think back and say, oh, that wasn't actually scary, it was just the wind. So those are the two different roads that fear takes to be processed in your brain. Okay, so in one of the earlier slides, I asked you to think about why why everybody has fears, certain phobias, and some people are afraid of things that you're not afraid of, and vice versa. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next few slides. Why is it that we, as humans that are so technologically advanced, are afraid? Why do we experience fear? I did answer it previously, but we'll go more in depth now. All right, so now we're going to answer that question. Why is it that humans experience fear? We're so smart, we're the smartest beings, as we say. So why is it that we have not found a way to maybe scientifically take fear out of our lives? Why can't we just be happy all the time? Unfortunately, if we were to be happy all the time and never experience fear, we would probably die out as a human race. All right, so that quote on the slide right there, without fear we would not be here, is very, very accurate to explain why we experience fear. So if you think back to when humans first came to this planet, not came, but first evolved to be humans and walking around the planet, think cavemen days. Fear maybe was not around. Maybe not every human had fear in their body. Maybe not everybody could experience fear. But through natural selection, those who did survive could experience fear. So let me give you another example. If you could just imagine like a caveman kind of walking through the safari or whatever and comes across an animal, a dangerous animal. However, this person doesn't have the emotion for fear, and so his or her body doesn't kind of go through that process of stop, this could be potentially dangerous. There's no self-preservation there, so they go towards this animal, and lo and behold, this animal attacks them, and then goodbye person. Another human comes along, and this time they have this predistinction for fear. They can experience fear, and they stop before they approach this animal, and they think, their body is sending them messages, their brain is sending him or her messages saying, oh, we're feeling a bit scared here. Your hands are getting a bit sweaty. You're getting a bit nervous. That animal looks very dangerous. Maybe that animal is what's making you feel really scared, and so they'll back away. It's kind of like that example I gave you with that dog. Your body stops and thinks, stops you from doing something dangerous. So fear actually promotes survival in the human race, meaning it stops us from doing stupid things. So if you fear the right things, you survive and pass your genes on. That's the whole evolutionary trait kind of debate that we have for fear. So just to maybe make it more applicable to modern day times, you've probably heard it before, but there's a saying that women live longer than men because men do stupid things. So it is being, scientifically proven that women fear more than men. Of course, it's a generalization and it doesn't apply to every single individual, but it has been shown that women often fear more than men. But that is not a negative all in all, because as you can see, women live longer because they fear things, so it stops them from doing stupid things, unlike men. Of course, not all men are like this, it's just a generalization once again. So that kind of applies to that whole saying, if you fear the right things, you survive and you pass your genes on. Maybe when you were younger, your mother told you to never put your hand on the hot stove. Of course, you're young, you're curious, and you're thinking, oh, I want to know what it feels like. So you put your hand on the hot stove, and then it hurts and it burns. And the next time, that experience makes you, well, I wouldn't say fear, but it's taught you not to put your hand on hot things, and then you survive that certain situation or aspect. Alright, so just to bring that whole caveman situation scenario up again, just imagine, this is a whole lot of imagining right now. So, could you imagine if cavemen were not afraid of beasts? So once again, if they were not afraid of beasts, we probably would not be here right now, because they would have walked straight into the beast's lair and be like, hello, my name is Bob, nice to meet you, and then got eaten. Who knows? But just to make it more applicable now, if we weren't afraid of a stranger knocking on the door at night when all alone at home. So maybe you've been in this situation before, maybe you haven't, maybe you know someone who has. I definitely have been in this situation before, but let's just go through it. So, when you're home alone at night with nobody else at home, and imagine it's a rainy day and it's dark and it's windy and the trees are banging against the window, it's the perfect scenario for a horror movie to happen. So we've seen all these horror movies in Hollywood before. Maybe if you're not a fan of scary movies, just imagine a scary movie. But we all know what happens if you're home alone at night and it's raining and it's dark and someone knocks on the door that you weren't expecting. If you open it, it'll probably be an axe murderer who's going to probably murder you with his axe, and you are no more, right? So what we've experienced through Hollywood films can actually trigger these senses of fear within us. So if this ever did happen to you in real life, you probably wouldn't go opening the door if you weren't expecting anybody and you were home alone and it was nighttime, like 12 o'clock in the morning, and the wind was going crazy, right? Your body would probably tell you to stop, think about it, and not open the door, okay? Maybe some of you will open the door, but you know what? That's up to you. All right, now that we've talked about where fear takes place in the brain, how fear is processed, and why we fear, because of survival instincts, it promotes human survival and evolutionary traits, yada yada yada, let's talk about how people experience fear. Do we all fear the same? Do we all experience fear to the same degree? Are we all afraid of the same things? Okay, so these are the questions we'll be answering in the next few slides, but I'd just like you to think about that now. Think about this question. What are you afraid of? Do you know anybody else who has the same fears as you? And to what degree do you share this fear? Okay, so the title says fear is subjective to the individual. Let's just focus on that word subjective. So subjective means not based on fact, but based on experiences and your own opinion about these experiences. All right, so that answers your question right there. We do not experience fear the same. For example, I have a fear of moths. Moths are those like ugly butterflies that are not butterflies. They're attracted to the light and they usually come out at night. So I have this intense fear of moths because when I was younger, I was just lying down in my bed at night time in my room with my lights on, and I was reading a book. And I thought, it's time for me to go to sleep. So I turn off the light and I go on my phone. And the phone emits just a small section of light, kind of reflected on my face. And this moth that I had no idea was in my room because it was flying around the light bulb in the ceiling came down and flew straight into my face. And I was so scared. I just screamed. And that is why I have the biggest fear of moths. Mind you, this moth was huge. It's about the size of my hand, and I have average sized hands, but that is a big size for a moth. Alright, so I just told you about my fear of moths and how I am really, really afraid of them. Some of you might also share this fear of moths. However, it might not be as intense as my fear. Maybe some of you are just scared of moths because you don't like the way it looks. You think they look a bit creepy, right? So that still pertains to the whole fear is subjective to the individual. Although some of you will share the same fears, such as heights and the dark, some of you will experience it more vividly or more than the other person. So it still is subjective to the individual, even though you share the same fears. So, who is more subjected to fear? Who kind of fears more? Is it just women? Because I said so in the beginning? No. So there are different type of parameters in a person's personality that will make you more prone to fear. So individuals with a timid temperament are more easily frightened. So a timid temperament just means someone who lacks confidence, someone who's a little shy, someone who's very nervous all the time and kind of is afraid of everything. So that's what timid means. They're not assertive. They don't show the confidence and kind of that leadership outgoingness that other people who are not timid do. So people who are timid, shy, kind of nervous all the time, very conscious about everything and very aware of what's happening, they are more easily frightened compared to someone who is more outgoing, who has more courage and bravery. They won't be frightened as easily, which makes sense. So just with the timid temperament, people who are nervous also tend to fear more, which makes sense because if you are timid, you are usually more nervous. So being nervous means anything from, oh, I have to do a speech, to I don't like the color of that, that makes me nervous. So nervous just kind of, it's the feelings of panic and anxiousness that individuals feel. Alright, so like I said before, women do fear more than men, and so do children, but that's because children don't have the experiences that adults do, so they haven't experienced much of life, so they will be a bit more, yes, they will be more curious than adults, but they'll also be more cautious because they don't know the effect of what they're being curious about. Women, on the other hand, are more fear subjected than men because of evolution. So back in the days, a long time ago, prehistoric times, men would go out and hunt and bring back the food that they hunt. All right, so because men are hunting and going out into the wilderness and chasing down, potentially dangerous animals, they are used to and they've grown used to being in dangerous situations, whereas women back in those times were to stay at home and look after the children, nurse them, and help them develop into adults. So women back in those days weren't as exposed to dangerous and fear-inducing situations, and so as we evolved as humans, we are more kind of timid and we're more subjected to fear. I'm not saying that all women now are timid and subjected to fear, but it is in general, women have more fears because of that evolutionary line where we were not exposed to as much danger as men. All right, so it just makes sense that those who are timid are more easily frightened, whereas those who are very aggressive, very kind of straightforward, kind of angry people, they have less fear. That's just because of their own behavioral personalities. So these are the type of people who are more prone to fear and why they experience fear like that. Okay, so we just talked about the different type of individuals that are more prone to fear. So now let's talk about different psychological factors that also affect the intensity of fear. So the first one is imagination, as shown by SpongeBob in the GIF over there. So if you're a person with a lot of imagination, unfortunately, you are more subjected to fear. Okay, so why is it that people with more vivid imaginations, more imagination, have more intense fears? Well, that's because the state of our mind. When we imagine a situation that is scary or fear inducing, if left unchecked, meaning if we don't deal with it, it can actually make our brain think that it's real. Our brain sometimes has trouble differentiating reality from imagination. And if you have a very strong imagination, sometimes that takes over reality. So if you can imagine you're in a dark room, right? The lights are off, maybe you're about to go to sleep, and you just watched a scary movie, and your lights are off, and you see a shadow by the door, and your imagination is running wild. Running wild means it's going overboard, it's just going, it's it's uncontrollable, right? And you think that there's a person standing there or a ghost, but you know that ghosts aren't real. However, because your imagination is so vivid, your brain isn't thinking about logical things like ghosts are not real. You're all it's thinking about is that that shadow by the door is a person who's going, or a ghost who's going to come and kill you. All right. So imagination sometimes takes over reality, and that's why our people with stronger imaginations does experience more intense fears. Okay, the other psychological factor that affects the intensity of fear that somebody experiences is attention. If you pay a lot of attention to minor details or small things, you're actually more subjected to experience fear to a higher intensity or degree. So just to make it real simple and kind of not blow your heads away, but imagine you're watching a movie with somebody sitting next to you. It's a scary movie, of course, and you're the type of person to really pay attention to the smallest details. You're thinking, oh, that music, it's getting louder. Something's going to happen. Oh, she's walking through the door by herself. Something's going to happen. Oh, there's a knock on the door. Who is it? Oh my God, what's happening? Right? So if you pay attention to all these minor details in the movie, it kind of collects on top of each other. But none of these details are answered. And so you're kind of panicking because what's going to happen? You have all these questions, all these little details that you've paid attention to that has led to many questions. Now you're just expecting for an answer. And you probably know what the answer is going to be if you watch a lot of scary movies, but you're still going to experience fear to a greater degree than to the person who's sitting next to you who is not really paying attention and is kind of just checking his phone or her phone every 3 minutes. And when the big scary part of the movie does happen, you're screaming and you're jumping, and this person next to you is just thinking, huh, that was scary. So, the more attention you pay to something, the more fear you experience. So just looking back at that example I used with imagination where you're in a dark room and you see a shadow and you're kind of freaking out, that's another thing that we're going to talk about, that fear is also intensified through darkness. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds before I move on to think why. Why is it that whenever we're put into an environment where there's minimal light or if it's complete darkness, all of a sudden we feel scared and we're more on edge than we are normally are. All right, so just think about that for a second. All right, did you have a think as to why we are more scared of the darkness? Well, let me tell you why. So, just this quote on the screen: we fear the unknown, the unfamiliar, and complete solitude. So, the first one, the unknown. As human beings, we are very, very curious, and we have this insatiable need to always have answers to things. That's why we're so advanced in technology and science. That's why we're so civilized in such a way that we have all these gadgets and tools at our predisposal, because we always need answers. Why is it this happens when you do this and that and that? So when we are put into a situation like a dark room where you're unfamiliar, you don't know where you are, and it's just darkness and you have no idea what's happening. We don't know. We don't have answers for this particular situation. And so we are put into the unknown, and we are scared because we always have to know. That's just who we are as humans. We're curious creatures. And so if you're put into a situation where you cannot see, it makes you feel really vulnerable and very subjected to danger or whatever it is that's lurking beyond the deep darkness. So we also fear the unfamiliar. We like knowing what's happening around us. For example, you go to your EF, it's an unfamiliar country, and when you first come to New Zealand, when you first get to EF, you're a little bit anxious, you're a little bit, maybe you're not completely scared, maybe you're not feeling intense fears, but there is still slight feelings of fear and slight feelings of nerves and anxiousness. It's because this particular situation is unfamiliar, right? But as you go on through your course and as you study with EF and as you go and see New Zealand and the people and the culture, you become familiar with it. And then those feelings of fear and nervous and anxiousness goes away. It slowly goes away until you're completely comfortable. Just like that, that's how fear can be explained when we're put into a dark room. We don't know what's happening around us and we're unfamiliar with this certain situation. So we become scared because there's no explanation for it. And the last one, we fear complete solitude. Solitude means being alone, being by yourself. Sometimes I like being by myself, I like taking breaks from socializing, but that's fine. I'm sure many of you also like time to yourself, just to relax and, just be by yourself. However, I don't think any of you would like to be alone forever. And so this feeling of complete solitude when you're placed in a dark room is intensified. Although we know logically we can always turn on the light or, move to a different room where it's not dark, solitude brings about feelings of darkness in your brain, in your mind, and it kind of takes over reality, just like imagination when we talked about it. It makes you feel completely alone, and nobody wants to be alone, and that's why our fear is intensified when we're in a dark room, because we cannot see anything, so we don't know what's happening, and it feels unfamiliar, and we feel alone. Alright, moving on from the darkness and fear and all that, let's talk about fear versus phobia. So phobia is a type of fear, however, it's an irrational fear. Irrational meaning there's no sense, there's no reason why you should be afraid of this because it isn't dangerous in any sort of way. And fear is rational. Okay, so fear is common and important for human adaptation and survival. For example, maybe you're afraid of a lion that's running towards you, but that makes sense because this lion will probably eat you. Okay, so fear is not debilitating. Debilitating means it doesn't hinder your everyday life. It doesn't stop you from going out of your house and talking to people and going to work or going to school. Fear doesn't hold you back. You can grow out of fears, meaning maybe you were scared of dogs when you were 5 years old, but now that you're 23, you're not afraid of dogs because, not all dogs will come and bite you. So you can grow out of fear as you grow older, as things start to make sense and you start to think logically, fear is kind of pushed back. However, phobia is very irrational. It's a very, 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 very extreme form of fear. And people with phobias, it's actually considered a mental disorder because it induces a lot of anxiety and panic, and it can actually harm your everyday life. It can stop you from going outside, it can stop you from talking to people, it can stop you from ever even leaving your room. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next few slides, the difference between fear and phobia, and focus more on some strange kind of phobias as well. Alright, so focusing on phobia. Phobia is something that someone fears that has very little or no threat at all. For example, that GIF on the side there, yes, it's a bit funny, but that kind of shows how there's a cucumber on the floor and the cat, it just reacts in the most craziest way possible. That's something completely different, but if you relate it to humans, it's kind of that type of intensity. For example, if I saw a cucumber and reacted in that way, that would make me you know, have a phobia of cucumbers, which makes no sense because cucumbers are no threat to us whatsoever. So there are three main groups of phobias. We have specific phobia, so this is usually a phobia towards objects such as, chairs, spiders, animals, that sort of thing. So they're the most type of common phobia. And then we have social phobia, so that's, as the name suggests, interacting with others. And then we also have agoraphobia. So agoraphobia is a bit different from specific phobia because specific phobia is like, objects, whereas agoraphobia is the fear of places and situations because it causes panic, helplessness, or embarrassment. All right, so once again, specific phobia, a very, very common one is arachnophobia, which is when someone has an intense fear of spiders. Social phobia is, for example, social anxiety. It means you cannot form relationships with anybody because you always have this fear that the person you're talking to is thinking negative thoughts about you or that you're going to embarrass yourself in front of them. This social phobia is very prevalent in teenagers, and it's actually quite hard for those who have this because they cannot form proper relationships, and most of them are as what we call loners, meaning they don't have friends and they're kind of just always to themselves, which is very sad. And also agoraphobia, like I said, is the fear of places and situations. So people with agoraphobia are usually homebound, meaning they don't ever leave their house because they're afraid that if they leave their house, the comfort and safety of their home, like, the familiarity and knowing what it is, if they leave that and they go outside, they're scared that, the open field, a plane might crash down and hit them. So they have these very intense fears of being outside because they think something bad is going to happen all the time. Okay, and research has shown that phobia is linked to genetics, brain chemistry, and gender. So yes, your genetics and your chemistry of your brain, your hormones and whatnot, and your gender does play a role in phobia. However, your environment does as well. So phobias are usually they've usually formed because of trauma. So trauma is a situation or event that has a very, very, very negative impact on a person. For example, if you're someone who has arachnophobia, maybe when you're little you were bitten by a poisonous spider and you spent a lot of time in ICU in the hospital trying to recover from that. So that all kind of near-death experience with a spider can lead to this irrational fear of all spiders that aren't poisonous. All right, so that's how phobias come about. Okay, so like I said, phobias are usually very irrational fears, so being scared of something that has no real threat or danger whatsoever. So let's just look at this list. So here we have xanthophobia, turophobia, genophobia, ablutophobia, xenoglossophobia, and sesquipedalophobia. That last one is very hard to say, but you can read it. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to, think. What do you think these strange phobias are about? Remember, they are very irrational fears. So have a guess. Okay, maybe you do know, maybe you don't know, but let's go over these very strange phobias. So the first one, xanthophobia, is the phobia of the color yellow. Yes, the color yellow. So people who experience xanthophobia will not own anything yellow. They probably will stay away from foods that are yellow and will probably, panic at the sight of the color yellow. The next one, turophobia, very fittingly, is the phobia of cheese. So if you have xanthophobia, the fear of the color yellow, you will probably avoid cheese. So if you have turophobia, you will avoid things like pizza, spaghetti, pasta, anything that's very cheesy, right? Genophobia is the phobia or fear of knees, Knees, that part of your body where your leg bends, those are your knees. So just think, what do you think this person would have experienced to be scared of knees? Because knees have no danger or threat whatsoever, but it is a thing, right? So number 4, ablutophobia, is a very kind of very, very debilitating one where it will definitely impact your life. Ablutophobia is the fear of washing or bathing. So people who experience ablutophobia cannot take showers or go into a swimming pool or go into the bathtub or wash their hands. They are afraid of being in a bathtub and showering and bathing, right? So just imagine how that could really impact your life in the negative way. The next one, xenoglossophobia, is the fear of foreign languages. So that's learning foreign languages. None of you have xenoglossophobia because you have all come to New Zealand to learn English, so don't think any of you would experience that. Okay, and the last one, the very hard one to say, sesquipedalophobia, is the fear of long words, which makes sense because it is the longest spelt phobia there. So those are just a glimpse of strange phobias that people have. Once again, we cannot choose our fears, okay? These phobias, people didn't choose to be afraid of cheese, right? This person didn't wake up one day and say, I don't like cheese. I'm gonna have this strange, very, very intense fear for it. Okay, so it must have been back in the past especially during their childhood, something traumatic happened with one of these phobias, and now they've developed this. All right, so the last slide of my lecture is about the little Albert experiment. So this little Albert experiment was conducted in 1920. It raised a lot of concerns in the scientific and psychology field because it did question a lot about ethics. It was morally wrong and ethically wrong, so this type of experiment won't be seen again anytime soon. But basically, this psychologist named John B. Watson took a baby named Albert from a hospital. He did ask the permission of his parents, don't worry, but he took this baby called Albert into his lab and started kind of experimenting with fear. Basically, he wanted to know if you could teach someone to fear. I told you before that we can't choose our fears, but we can, it just happens unexpectedly through experience. And so what John B. Watson wanted to do was show that yes, you could teach someone fear. However, this happens all in the subconscious. You're not actually aware that you're learning fear. So the process that John B. Watson used was the scientific process called classical conditioning. And basically, what he did was he taught baby Albert, to be afraid of a white rat. Okay, so Albert had no idea that a rat was not scary. So before Albert was exposed to this rat, he didn't really think about it much. So what John B. did was he took Albert and he took a rat and he put the rat in front of Albert, and Albert showed no signs of fear whatsoever. Over the next few weeks, few months, what John B. Watson did was he took the rat, and every time Albert went to go touch the rat, he would play a very, very loud noise in the background. He would hit like a drum or like a metal pan or something, but a very, very loud noise that would make baby Albert scared, really, really scared, and jump. So he kept doing this. He kept showing the rat to Albert, and every time Albert went to go touch the rat, bang, a loud noise, and Albert would start crying. Over time, after many exposures to this rat, Albert started associating the rat to the loud noise that made him scared. So he didn't realize that this rat had nothing to do with that noise, but now he is thinking that whenever this rat is there, that noise is going to be heard. So he became very, very scared. So John B. Watson knew that his experiment was a success when he showed baby Albert the rat, and without even going near the rat, just the sight of the rat, without even touching it, baby Albert would start crying and show deep stresses of fear. Eventually, baby Albert became scared of anything furry, such as a rabbit or a small dog or even a white pillow placed next to him. So John B. Watson was very successful in making Albert not only afraid of a rat, but anything white and furry and small, which is very, very sad. I'm not sure what's happened to Albert now, but that just goes to show that yes, we experience fear and our life experiences makes us afraid of something, but also you can learn fear, just not you're aware of it. All right, so that's the end of my lecture. I will have questions for you to answer on a separate page, and there will be a link to the video about the little Albert experiment.